March 15, 2003. A quiet dirt path on the outskirts of Middletown, New York, just off Bowser Road. There, beneath the cold morning sky, the body of a young woman was discovered. She was lying alone, bruised and lifeless. The cause of death? Blunt force trauma to the head. It was obvious. Brutal. Immediate. But there was no murder weapon. No suspect. No witnesses. Her name was Megan McDonald. She was 20 years old. A college student. A waitress. A daughter of a respected NYPD detective. And someone who, by all accounts, was just beginning to step into adulthood. Her death would mark the beginning of a mystery that would haunt her family and investigators for 2 entire decades. Leads would come and go. Suspects would circle the radar. But justice never came. Not until 2023, 20 years, 1 month, and 4 days after she was killed. So, what happened to Megan McDonald that night? Was it a crime of passion? A long-held grudge? Or something much more calculated? Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from, and let me ask you this: do you believe justice delayed is justice denied? And if you're into true crime stories that uncover decades of buried truths and unanswered questions, hit the like button and subscribe. This one is personal. To understand the weight of this case, you need to know who Megan McDonald was. She was born in early 1983, the youngest child in the McDonald family. Her father, Dennis McDonald, wasn't just any father. He was a highly respected NYPD detective, known for his role in major investigations, including the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. Law enforcement ran deep in the bloodline. Discipline, duty, and justice were values Megan grew up hearing about at the dinner table. The family lived in Middletown, New York, a peaceful, tight-knit community nestled in Orange County. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect a murder like this. Megan grew up surrounded by people who knew her, watched her grow, and adored her for her radiant spirit. Those who knew her describe her as lively, kind, and a social butterfly. Megan was one of those people who lit up a room without even trying. Friends say she had a magnetic energy, always smiling, always talking, always including others. She was the type of young woman who remembered your birthday, who called you just to check in, and who carried her father's sense of loyalty like a badge of honor. But in 2002, tragedy struck. Her father, her hero, passed away. Megan was only 19. His death shook the family, but it especially shook Megan. Losing her father pushed her to grow up fast. She started receiving $1,250 a month from his pension, and with that came both a safety net and pressure. The kind of pressure no 19-year-old should have to face. Still, Megan pressed on. She enrolled at Orange County Community College, trying to find her path. To support herself, she picked up a job as a waitress at the American Cafe inside the Galleria Mall. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her the freedom to manage her schedule and her independence. She had close friendships, a supportive circle that kept her grounded. She'd recently signed a lease on a new apartment, was exploring a new romantic relationship, and looking ahead to brighter days. But not everything in Megan's world was healthy. In the months before her death, she had ended a tumultuous relationship with Edward Hawley, a man several years older than her. According to public records and court documents, Hawley was more than just an ex-boyfriend. He was also her primary supplier of marijuana, someone she saw and spoke to almost daily. Their relationship was reportedly one of emotional dependency, financial borrowing, and frequent arguments. Megan had even lent him money from her pension to help him buy a car, money he later refused to repay. That betrayal deeply hurt her. And not long after that, she made a decision. She ended things. Cut him off. Walked away. She was ready to turn a corner in her life. But Megan McDonald never got the chance to see what was waiting on the other side. Friday, March 14, 2003. Megan McDonald was doing what many 20-year-olds do, spending time with friends, celebrating a birthday, laughing, smiling, enjoying the night. She was at a small gathering, a birthday party held in Middletown. Those who were there say nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Megan was her usual self, upbeat, easygoing, full of energy. But at some point, that night, shortly after midnight, she left the party. Alone. Witnesses recall seeing her drive off in her white Mercury sedan. What they didn't realize at the time was that someone was following her. In a car that, around town, had a reputation of its own. A purple Honda Civic, infamous in the area for its loud music, flashy look, and the man behind the wheel. Edward Hawley. He wasn't just her ex-boyfriend. He was the kind of ex who didn't let go easily. The kind who, even after the breakup, kept showing up. That night, several witnesses later reported seeing both vehicles pull into the same apartment complex in Wallkill, just a few miles away. They watched as Hawley parked his car, and then climbed into Megan's. What happened after that is still unknown. What we do know is that Megan never showed up for her noon shift the next day at the American Cafe in the Galleria Mall. And that alone set off alarm bells. She was always punctual. Always reliable. Her coworkers waited, unsure. Her phone went straight to voicemail. As the afternoon turned to evening, her friends began reaching out. Calling. Texting. No response. By the time her mother and sister began calling, there was a growing sense of dread. This wasn't like Megan. She didn't go off the radar. She didn't disappear without a word. There were no outgoing calls. No texts. No social media updates. Just silence. The last confirmed sighting of Megan McDonald was on that dark stretch of pavement in Wallkill, when Edward Hawley stepped into her car. After that, she vanished. March 15, 2003. Just one day after Megan was last seen, her body was discovered near a dirt path off Bowser Road, in the town of Wallkill, just outside Middletown, New York. A quiet, rural spot, the kind of place where no one was supposed to end up like this. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, not one strike, but multiple, brutal blows. According to investigators, the weapon was likely a handheld object, but it was never found. Whoever had done this didn't leave much behind. But what they did leave, spoke volumes. 2 days later, Megan's white Mercury sedan was located. It had been abandoned, quietly towed, and taken to state police headquarters in Middletown. Inside, investigators uncovered disturbing signs, blood, damage, and evidence of what they described as a vicious assault. Megan had not died peacefully. She had suffered. The New York State Police immediately launched a full-scale investigation. They began canvassing the area, speaking to neighbors, friends, co-workers, anyone who might have seen something. They followed up on Megan's last known movements, traced calls, and pulled surveillance footage from nearby businesses. And then, they spoke to Edward Hawley. He had been one of the last people seen with Megan. Police interviewed him several times over the years, 4 times, in fact. But from the very beginning, Hawley's cooperation was limited. He was evasive, offered little clarity, and according to police, eventually disappeared from the radar entirely. Megan's mother and sister, heartbroken and desperate, stepped forward. They made public pleas for information, asking anyone with even the smallest clue to come forward. Flyers were printed. Posters were stapled across town. Candlelight vigils were held in Megan's honor. And the community responded. But the pain only grew. As the investigation deepened, more agencies got involved. The FBI joined the case. So did the NYPD Detectives Endowment Association, the same department where Megan's father had once served. They offered reward money, hoping it would spark someone's conscience, or at the very least, rattle a loose end. But days turned into weeks. And weeks into months. The people of Middletown were in shock. This wasn't supposed to happen here. Not to Megan. The frustration, among her family, the investigators, and the community, was impossible to ignore. And while leads would come and go, one name kept returning. Edward Hawley. But without hard evidence, the case stayed in limbo. And Megan McDonald's killer remained free. The days following Megan McDonald's murder were filled with shock, but what came after was a grief that lingered for years. Her family was devastated. The kind of devastation that doesn't ease with time. Megan wasn't just a daughter or a sister, she was their light. Their youngest. Their future. Her sister, Karen Whalen, stepped into a role no sibling should ever have to fill, the voice of a family in mourning. In interviews, news conferences, and community events, Karen became the public face of the fight for justice. And through her eyes, the world began to understand just how deep this wound ran. Megan had been planning her next chapter. She had just signed a lease on a new apartment, looking forward to moving out on her own and starting fresh. She had new friends, a new relationship, and a quiet optimism about what was coming next. She never got the chance. The autopsy offered little comfort, only horror. Megan's death wasn't the result of a random act or an opportunistic attack. It was violent. Personal. She had been struck repeatedly in the head, and investigators noted the overkill, a disturbing sign that this was an act driven by rage. This wasn't someone lashing out in fear. This was someone who knew her. And as painful as it was, there was an added weight to her family's loss. Just 1 year earlier, Megan's father, Dennis McDonald, had passed away. A veteran NYPD detective who had served during some of New York's darkest moments, including the 1993 World Trade Center bombing investigation, Dennis had spent his life protecting others. But when it mattered most, he wasn't there to protect his daughter. Megan's funeral was held in Middletown, drawing family, friends, neighbors, and dozens of members from the law enforcement community. Men and women who had worked beside her father now came to say goodbye to his daughter. The pain was thick. The silence in the air said what words couldn't. And yet, there were no answers. The investigators continued their work. They followed leads, interviewed witnesses, and narrowed their list of suspects. Edward Hawley remained high on that list. But no matter how strong the suspicions, there was no physical evidence tying him, or anyone, to the murder. No DNA. No confession. No weapon. The case sat in a painful limbo. For Megan's family, it wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about pressure. Pressure on the police. Pressure on the town. Pressure on a system that, for years, seemed unable to deliver justice. And yet, they never gave up hope. From early on, one name kept surfacing. One person whose connection to Megan couldn't be ignored. Edward Hawley. They had once dated. But this wasn't a storybook romance, it was messy, unstable, and by all accounts, increasingly volatile. According to investigators and court records, Edward Hawley wasn't just Megan's ex-boyfriend. He was also her primary marijuana supplier, someone she saw almost daily. Their relationship was defined by dependency, emotionally and financially. In the months before her death, Megan had lent Hawley money from her father's pension to help him buy a car. It was a generous gesture, one she likely thought he would repay. But he didn't. Instead, when Megan asked for the money back, he refused. Tensions grew. Arguments followed. And not long after, Megan ended the relationship. It should have been over. But for Hawley, it wasn't. In the days leading up to Megan's murder, witnesses began to notice troubling behavior. According to police documents and interviews, Hawley had started following her. Stalking her. He'd show up in places she hadn't invited him to. make appearances that seemed more than coincidental. The people closest to Meghan became uneasy, and they weren't alone. Holly drove a car that was hard to miss, a purple Honda Civic known around Middletown for blasting music at full volume. The loudest car in town, some residents called it. And on the night Meghan disappeared, that very car was seen tailing her as she left a friend's birthday party. Witnesses would later report seeing both cars pull into a Wallkill apartment complex, shortly after midnight. Then, they saw Holly get into Meghan's car. She was never seen alive again. Investigators would go on to interview Holly 4 times over the next 20 years. Not once did he confess. Not once did he crack. And despite heavy suspicions, there was no physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, no recovered weapon. That tied him directly to the crime. Still, the motive was there. Meghan had moved on. She had started seeing someone new. She had signed a lease for a new apartment. She was turning the page, and leaving Holly behind. To many, that might have been enough to make a clean break. But to someone like Holly, it may have felt like rejection. Like betrayal. Like rage. And so, over the years, while other names came and went, Edward Holly remained the prime suspect. A man who had both opportunity and motive. A man with a history. And a man who, until 2023, walked free. For most homicide cases, time is the enemy. Memories fade. Witnesses scatter. Evidence grows cold. But in the case of Meghan MacDonald, the clock never stopped ticking. From 2003 to 2022, her murder investigation remained open, never officially declared cold. The New York State Police kept the case file active for nearly 2 decades, constantly returning to old evidence, revisiting interviews, and chasing leads, over 300 of them. Detectives didn't stop at the New York State line. They traveled across state borders, consulted FBI behavioral profilers, and worked alongside local and federal partners to re-examine the events of March 2003. And all the while, one man's name stayed in the files, Edward Holly. While he hadn't been charged in Meghan's murder, he wasn't living quietly. Over the years, Holly was arrested several times for unrelated criminal activity, including drug offenses and probation violations. He was in and out of custody, but never charged in connection to Meghan. Still, investigators watched. Waited. Hoping that one day, something new would surface. That moment came in 2022, when the NYPD Detectives Endowment Association, a group deeply connected to Meghan's father, the late Detective Dennis MacDonald, teamed up with the FBI to reignite public interest. They jointly announced a $20,000 reward for information that could lead to an arrest or conviction in Meghan's case. And then, something changed. A billboard went up, right along Route 17 in Middletown. It showed Meghan's photo, a tip line, and one unspoken promise: we haven't forgotten. It wasn't just a sign, it was a spark. Behind the scenes, investigators began re-examining forensic evidence using modern tools unavailable in 2003. Technology had advanced. Testing methods had evolved. And with it came a renewed sense of urgency. Meanwhile, in Middletown, Meghan's family and friends prepared for an unthinkable milestone: 20 years without her. On March 15, 2023, the community gathered for a candlelight vigil, not only to remember Meghan, but to remind the world that she mattered. Her sister, Karen Whalen, spoke publicly that day. She reminded everyone that Meghan's laughter still echoed in their memories. That her absence still felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. And that they were still waiting, for truth, for closure, for justice. 2 decades. 1 victim. Hundreds of interviews. 1 suspect. The case had never gone cold. But it was about to catch fire. April 2023. After 20 long years of questions, heartbreak, and unanswered prayers, a breakthrough. The man who had been at the center of suspicion for 2 decades, Edward Hawley, was arrested. It didn't happen with a dramatic chase or a surprise confession. It happened quietly, inside the Orange County Correctional Facility, where Hawley was already being held on unrelated charges tied to a narcotics-related probation violation. Then came the announcement. Edward Hawley was officially charged with second-degree murder in the 2003 killing of Megan McDonald. The news sent shockwaves through Middletown. A community that had mourned with Megan's family, attended vigils, followed every headline, now held its breath. Was this finally the moment they had waited for? The New York State Police held a press conference. But despite the magnitude of the arrest, they did not reveal the full scope of the evidence. Investigators confirmed only that the case was now active in court, and that Hawley had become the focal point of renewed prosecution efforts. Hawley's response was swift. He pleaded not guilty. To this day, no trial date has been set. But for Megan's family, the arrest marked something sacred, the first step toward justice. Her sister, Karen Whalen, stood before cameras and reporters and made a statement that carried the weight of 20 years. The coward who killed our beloved Megan is where he belongs, in jail. The relief was visible, but it wasn't total. Not yet. Megan's family knows that justice is a process. And after everything they've been through, cautious hope is the only kind they can afford. Karen still keeps Megan's childhood photos displayed throughout her home. In every image, Megan is smiling, frozen in time, untouched by the violence that ended her life. But the weight of her absence never lifts. The loss is permanent. The pain is unshakable. But finally, after 2 decades of waiting, justice has begun. It took 20 years. A shattered family. A determined police force. And a community that refused to forget. But finally, there's a name. Edward Hawley. He's been charged. But he hasn't been convicted. And for some, the question still remains. Do you believe Edward Hawley is guilty? Or did law enforcement reach for a name after 2 decades of pressure? Let us know what you think in the comments. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a case we cover. Because for Megan McDonald, and for so many others still waiting on justice, their stories matter. Stay safe. Stay aware. And keep seeking the truth. Megan McDonald, we will never forget you.